Good afternoon. My name is Diane Tigesser, and I'm the Senior Advisor, External Relations for the Global CCS Institute. I'd like to welcome all of you, and particularly our international audience, to our webinar this afternoon. This afternoon's webinar is on the global status of CCS 2014, with an emphasis on the status of CCS in the Americas. Our presenter this afternoon is Dr. Elizabeth Burton, the Institute's General Manager, the Americas. Dr. Burton has more than 25 years of experience in the energy sector, carbon management, and climate change research and policy. She's a PhD geologist and the author of over 100 technical publications and books. All attendees are welcome to submit questions throughout the presentation through the Questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Please submit your questions in English. Questions will be moderated and posed at the conclusion of the presentation. Please be aware that we may not be able to answer all the questions today, but we will attempt to get through as many questions as possible during the time allotted. And now to Liz for the presentation.
Thanks, Diane. The slide I'm seeing are just some important quotations from the past year and a half or so that demonstrate that many independent organizations are making the point that we cannot meet our climate change goal of 450 ppm CO2 by the end of the century unless we include CCS. So the voices are continuing, and we're, I believe, getting more support from a diverse set of organizations to show that CCS is not just important but necessary. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Global CCS Institute, we are an international member responsive organization headquartered in Melbourne, but we have regional offices now. This is a relatively new development for the Institute over the last 2 years, and really in the Americas just the last year we've staffed up. So we have 3 regional offices to better serve our members' needs: the Americas office, the Europe, Africa, Middle East office, and the Asia Pacific office. We have many international members coming from governments, global and regional corporations, small companies, research bodies, and NGOs. And we have endeavored, as we've staffed up, to include experts across the whole CCS, CCUS value chain. And basically our mission is to accelerate development, demonstration, deployment of CCS globally, not by doing projects ourselves, although we do some small research studies. We're not doing soup to nuts demos, but we are focusing on knowledge sharing, fact-based advocacy, and creating favorable conditions for those project developers that do implement CCS. Next slide. The Americas team has its main office in Washington, D.C., but also an office in Calgary. We serve members in the entire Western Hemisphere, which is a bit of a challenge since there are only really 8 of us. I am the general manager, as Diane mentioned. Neil Wilquist joined us from PTRC back in June. He is our storage specialist and is based in Calgary. Pam Tomsky does policy and regulation. Diane Teisiger is media relations, external relations, and communication. Ron Munson is our capture expert who recently joined us from NETL, actually worked for LTI as a consultant to NETL. Mead Harris is our capacity development expert. Vic Durr, we've managed to convince to stay with us as a senior advisor. As some of you may know, he was the acting GM before I joined in June. And Ellen Brody has joined us as our administrative manager in the DC office. The key publication of the Institute is the Global Status of CCS report, which was just rolled out at our Abu Dhabi annual meeting a week ago. And this year's report is a little bit longer and more comprehensive than previous reports, and just gives everyone a comprehensive overview of global and regional developments in CCS, projects, technologies, and policy and legal and regulatory developments. We believe it's one of the best, if not the best, sort of summaries and synopses of the events in CCS that have happened over the past year. We provide project descriptions for the largest projects and some of the quote-unquote notable CCS projects across the globe. And we've started trying to make generic recommendations for decision makers on how to move CCS forward. You can find the full report online on our website, and I've provided the link there, www.globalccsinstitute.com, for those of you that would like to download it. If you'd like a hard copy, please send an email to any of us. Large-scale CCUS projects by region and phase. So this is just a breakdown of where projects are in terms of their development in different parts of the world. And North America still leads the pack with 26, and we are seeing good follow through along the pipeline. So we have a pretty even distribution of projects from early planning through operation. China is really accelerating, and they have 12 projects now in early planning and advanced planning, and we expect these to move through the pipeline pretty quickly. Next, Europe and the UK in particular is where most of the activity in Europe is occurring right now. Has a couple of projects in early planning and advanced planning, and 2 still somewhat operational, for a total of 8. The Gulf Cooperation Council, which is the Middle East, has 2 under construction, and the rest of the world, 4 in early planning and 3 in construction and operation. So this gives us a total of 55 projects, which I think is very encouraging. If we look at this data in contrast to what we were seeing in 2011, I think it's kind of a mixed message, but overall I'm a bit more optimistic than I have been over the last 10 or so years looking at progress in CCS. As of July of 2014, which is when we roll up the data to put the report together, you can see, and these colors just are representations of the phases. So the green is identify, the peach color is evaluate, blue is define, purple is execute or construct, and operate is the gold at the end of the bar. So you see, in some cases, such as continental Europe, we do have a decline in from 2011 to 2014, but the U.S. is more or less holding steady. China shows a big increase over those 3 years, 2.5 years. Canada is holding steady, although we do see a lot have moved into that purple and gold area. So, and the UK is showing good progress as well, where things are moving to define from evaluate. So it's, I think, good news overall. Again, looking at the same data rolled up another way, we see 22 active projects defined as being in construction or operational. The key division between these phases is the FID is completed, and obviously people are making or executing on their investment decisions, basically. So the money is there and on the table and being spent, basically. 34 projects in development and planning. So again, overall, I think this is very good news for 2014 compared to what we were seeing in 2012 and 2013. If we look at the types of projects according to whether they are EOR or non-EOR in terms of storage, and also by the type of source for the CO2, this is the way we've tried to diagram that, again comparing where we were in 2011 with where we are now in 2014. And again, the colors show the phase of the project. The symbol shows you what type of CO2 source we're dealing with, and then the two categories for storage are shown here also. So there's a lot of information in this table, and actually we do hope that when you all give presentations on CCS that you feel free and can easily access the various charts and diagrams that we have in the report. And certainly do tell us if you have any issues with downloading any of these for your own use. As long as you attribute it to us, we're very happy to share the graphics with you, and hope you will use them. In Europe, again, in terms of operational, we had 2 natural gas processing plants with saline storage in 2011. Now we see by 2014 the addition of 1 in the planning stage that's related to power generation. In North America, you see a lot more little symbols there, particularly the growth in EOR and in power generation and other industries beyond the natural gas processing and things that are related specifically to oil. And we see more in the execute phase, even in non-EOR. And again, most of that activity is really happening up in Canada, but not all of it. And in the rest of the world, you see very significant growth, again, driven a lot by China, but not exclusively, from 2011 to 2014. And again, a good distribution of different types of CO2 sources, not just natural gas processing, which has been the kind of low-hanging fruit for CCS projects in many ways, but we also see power generation, and in particular, the project in the Middle East that is going forward on a iron and steel plant there. This again is the same data, just to show you, I think very visually, the difference we will see in the types of sources that CCS is being applied to. Up to 2014, you see a lot of nice-sized projects going forward in hydrogen production, on natural gas processing, oil refinery, fertilizer production, synthetic natural gas, and mostly shown by the blue, EOR projects. And Boundary Dam is actually a nice combination, the very first soup to nuts on power generation, combining both EOR and saline storage through the Aquastore part of that project. Subsequent to 2015, when we look at the stuff that's in the pipeline, we really start to see this diversification across the full spectrum of sources for CO2 capture, basically. And we're very pleased to see that diversification finally happening. Out to 2020, we will see a huge growth particularly in the power generation sector of projects employing CCS. And in particular, the Boundary Dam CCUS opening, which our CEO, Brad Page, was a keynote speaker, is a really important milestone because it is one of the first projects that does go, takes power, a coal-fired plant, and employs CCS on one of its turbines. So we're very pleased to see that off the ground and up and running in end of August, early September. Another important milestone for this year is that CCUS, a major demonstration project, was actually included in the U.S.-China Clean Energy Agreement that was just signed a couple weeks ago. And it's very interesting choice of a different type of CCUS project. And the concept of this project, which you may have heard Julio Friedman talk about recently, is to combine storage of CO2 with enhanced water recovery. So in this case, you would actually be producing back the water, probably for pressure maintenance of the storage reservoir, and treating that water to create a new freshwater source. And this is a technology that's been investigated in concept, but this will be a very important opportunity to actually try to demonstrate it on the ground at a large scale. So we're very excited to see that that was called out quite explicitly and at a very high level at this clean energy agreement that was just signed between the two countries. The concern, though, in spite of all the good news this year, is that we still have a very daunting challenge ahead of us. If we look at the amount of CO2 that's captured, and again, the blue here shows active large-scale CCS projects. So that's carbon dioxide that has been put away or will be put away, assuming those projects keep operating through 2020. And if projects come online that are in the planning stages, those green bars will be added. So we right now are around 40 metric tons per annum of CO2 that's being captured. If we stay on track, by 2020 we'll be at a little over 100 per annum, and that comes to about 3 gigatons cumulatively over 30 years. But if we look at the wedge charts, and this is one scenario out to 2050, and this is the IEA study and scenario, but there are others. But in general, most of them attribute about 14 to 19% of the carbon emissions reductions have to be completed or solved by use of CCS or CCUS. And if we look at what that wedge is, starting again in 2011, you see CCS is growing, that purple wedge up on the diagram. That equates to about 150 gigatons stored by 2050. And if we look at the size, just sort of do a back of the envelope, how many projects that is given sort of an average size of a source, that's about 3,000 CCS projects that we have to have up and operating by 2050 to get to that goal. So in that context, the 3 that we've achieved or will achieve by 2020 is really kind of a drop in the bucket, but it is something, and I think we have to take heart, but also realize that the size of the challenge is really quite daunting and needs an accelerated pace to transform energy structure to enable us to meet that goal. So having said that, one of the things that the Institute does is look at how we can help project developers build a business case. And CSLF has made a statement again late last year that R&D, demonstration, and global deployment has to be accelerated, again, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And they made a commitment to taking the necessary actions to promote further development of CCS. But what kinds of actions does that really entail? We see the elements as really defining a pyramid here, or a triangle in 2 dimensions: technology, policy and markets, and understanding and acceptance. And in this triangle, industry, universities, schools, research organizations, and government organizations all have to play a role and collaborate to make CCUS projects happen, and to make the case that this is a good business, a good investment. Just kind of looking at the apices of these triangles, if we assess where we are with technology, the individual components, as most of you probably know, are pretty well understood. Many are technically mature. Safe storage has been demonstrated by dedicated CCS projects for over a decade now, and by EOR projects for over 40 years. What we need the pilot and large-scale demonstration projects for is to contribute to confidence that we know how to couple all of these technologies into integrated systems, and that we have confidence that we can run these safely and effectively. There are many opportunities still in the technology realm, particularly in capture systems. There are many novel capture methods that really might be game changers in terms of the cost of capture. There's plenty of opportunity to optimize how these systems are operated, and there's a lot of engineering work that could be done to see if new builds and retrofits to different types of power plants can be improved, particularly looking across the spectrum of pre-post and oxy-combustion to really try and optimize the way we deploy capture, making it fit the way we are going to be running our future energy infrastructure. We still have a lot to do in terms of reducing the uncertainty in subsurface storage. We need, I think, to understand exactly what sorts of things we can do to remediate and mitigate leakage risks. We certainly don't ever want to have a leak, and I think we have a good handle that this is a very low risk type of event, but nevertheless, working on how you would remediate such an event is an important research activity. And we need to build confidence of storage permanence and exactly define what that means so we can move forward with the right types of protocols to count storage in both saline and EOR without making MMV requirements so onerous that it becomes impracticable. And again, this idea that you can't just do a CCS project in isolation. How energy infrastructure is going to evolve over the next up to 2050, so the next 35 years, is really important, because you might find that the way you deploy CCUS in 2030 will be different than the way you might deploy it today. An example is with high penetration of renewables, the way you run a baseload or a rampable natural gas plant might be very different and might require a different type of a capture infrastructure or facility when you're running your plant that way. We need to optimize pipeline networks. Again, the one-off is probably not the most economic solution. And enabling renewables, again, through using fossil power, which I think many people that are looking at high renewable portfolio standards are realizing you still need fossil power to make that type of power input into the grid work well. And again, just to beat the drum on knowledge sharing will increase the pace from going from the first of kind plant to the nth. And you'll see me saying that over and over again on the next two apices as well. Policy and markets. We are seeing consistently policy throughout the world that acknowledges the importance of CCUS to mitigating climate change. Unfortunately, when you kind of drill down from that, you don't see the policies being enacted to provide long-term clarity that will help businesses move projects forward. We certainly don't see CCUS treated equivalent to other low-carbon technologies in terms of incentives or portfolio standards. Existing funding programs are running out, and it will be interesting to see how the US, Canada, and Europe will address this over the next few years. We look to Paris and the new US-China agreement as being, potential and actual bright spots in funding for moving CCUS forward. What we'd like to see is that CCUS is explicitly included as a technology in climate policy. I think the US-China agreement actually does that. We'd like to see more of that. I think there has to be some feedback between policymakers and regulators on how what comes down as policy or regulations actually affects the business case for CCS. We need to have CCUS included in clean energy and low carbon roadmaps, and we need to increase the pace of capacity development through international knowledge sharing. And again, we can increase the pace from first of kind to nth by knowledge sharing. Understanding and acceptance. Global awareness and understanding is still pretty low. It's perceived as an experimental technology. It has a bad rap in some corners because it's associated with enabling fossil fuels, because people don't really realize where their electrons come from. Fossil fuel infrastructure and energy reliability are inextricably linked, but how they're linked is not recognized, and the importance of continuing fossil fuel use to ensure reliability is not recognized. We have to build stakeholder relationships, focusing on risks and economic benefits, and increasing recognition and understanding. So advertising successful projects. If you are a project developer, sharing success stories is very, very important, and I know it can be sensitive, but if we can help you do so, we would love to. Establishing best practices. We plan to help NETL with their very good best practices reports that they've been putting out. There will be a whole new raft of those coming out soon, and we hope to help make those available and more widely known throughout the community. We'd like to encourage more public advocacy and education in the schools. I think if you can start with people young with recognizing the importance of this technology, they'll grow up thinking about it as something familiar, not as something new. And again, knowledge sharing is so important. So just again to emphasize, if there's alignment of CCS policy and regulatory environments, investment will follow. And we've seen this definitely with other types of clean energy technologies. And the bar chart here is just very striking. There is almost $2 trillion of investment in clean energy, but if you look at the share for CCS, it's just piddling in comparison. So we have to get the alignment of policy and parity for CCS before we can expect to get the proper share of investment for this technology. So you'll also find in the report a section on recommendations for decision makers. Again, near-term policy support is absolutely critical. We have to have emission reduction policies that give investors confidence to invest in it and to make that business case. We need programs that encourage exploration of storage resource, particularly in developing countries. Substantial emissions reductions are required in these non-OECD countries, and a focused effort is really required to increase project activity in these economies. And this has some urgency because many of these countries are really developing energy infrastructures right now, and it's just so much easier to get CCUS included while you're building your infrastructure rather than to add it on afterwards. And CCS is recognized now as the only technology that can achieve large reductions in CO2 emissions, particularly in industries such as iron, steel, and cement. So to get the CO2 emissions from those industries out of the atmosphere, you've got to use CCS. So giving urgent attention to this has to be done by policymakers, apart from power and the other sectors. So our call to action is to move the agenda forward. We see CCS in the power sector now. We've got 50% more projects than we did at the start of the decade. We need decisions now from policymakers. We have to get the word out, and the challenge, we think, is really on those two bottom parts of the triangle. It's not technology, it's policy and understanding, and we really would encourage the CCS community to help get the word out about recent successes. And we believe if we can do this in the next year, we can really see the acceleration we need in CCS around the world. So I think that's the last slide, Diane. Is that right? So thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, Liz, for the excellent presentation and your insights on CCS in the Americas. Just a reminder, all attendees are welcome to submit questions through the Questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. And again, please submit your questions in English. Liz, the first question is, there are 15 large-scale CCS projects in the construction or operation phase in North America, but only 5 in the early planning stages. What conditions in North America are contributing to the small number of projects in the early planning stages?
The 15 projects that are currently moving forward in North America, many, if not all of them, have significant government funding from the Department of Energy that put a great deal of funding in through the Regional Carbon Sequestration Partnership Program initially, and then through the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act subsequently. The 5 in early planning don't necessarily have that same level of government support, and there are no current calls for proposals or requests for offers moving forward through the U.S. government to really put those new projects in the pipeline. In Canada, we have seen more recent government support, particularly in Alberta, for new projects, and that's probably where most of those early planning projects are coming from rather than the U.S., although there are some in the U.S. that are in the evaluate stage, certainly. So I know it's always difficult because governments have competing needs and agendas, but we really do need to see a sustained effort in CCS large-scale funding. Again, the U.S.-China agreement, unfortunately, that project will be done in China, according to the announcement, not in the U.S. or in North America, but that kind of signal is just so important to developers that are struggling to get these projects off the ground. The benefit that Sask Power had is the big commitment that the province of Saskatchewan and the Canadian federal government made to making that project happen. And it really will need additional government support to move forward with its next phases, which it's planning to move with. So.
The next question is, the launch of Boundary Dam was a major milestone for CCS in the power sector. What's the continued outlook for CCS on power, particularly in the Americas?
I think that the challenge that the U.S. has is the very low price of natural gas right now. So to meet the types of emission standards that most power producers see in the future, switching to natural gas from coal is the more obvious and less risky way to reduce emissions than to put a CCS facility onto a coal plant. Now, the problem with that is that that only gets you so far. It certainly doesn't get you into the deep cuts in emissions that we're going to need for 2050. And at that point, who knows what the forecasts are for the relative cost of natural gas versus coal, but it may be that we're making the wrong short-term decisions to meet a shorter timeline for emissions reductions that in the long run are not going to be the right answer for changing our power infrastructure in the future. So I mean, Boundary Dam is very important because they went ahead, they said, no, we have a coal plant, we're going to stick with it, we have a good fuel source that's dependable and with good steady price forecasts for the lignite that they're using, and they made a commitment to move ahead with the power plant, with a coal-fired plant, and put CCS on it, and I think that's a good message.
The next question is, how will the U.S.-China Clean Energy Agreement affect the development, demonstration, and deployment of CCS projects, not only in the U.S. and China, but globally?
I think the important thing about that project is, first, it's a new federal commitment to a large-scale demonstration project, and it's also a new concept. This idea of means to include freshwater production is, I think, a very important addition to the permutations and the variety of CCUS projects that are potential solutions. And this type of project should be very important and looked at strongly by those parts of the world that have water shortages. California, the western U.S., Australia certainly, the Middle East. If this works, I think it's a model for moving forward and actually monetize, getting a new revenue stream from water out of CCUS, which can only improve the business case.
We have a question. Which projects are the best examples to use when talking about CCS with the public?
Wow, that's a good question. So far, all projects that are operational can be defined as successes. And by that I mean we haven't had any bad actors in the portfolio, and that's wonderful, and we want to keep it that way. As we certainly don't want one poorly planned project giving the whole industry bad press. It, to some degree, would certainly depend on the audience. For policymakers, you would definitely want to focus on projects that are important to the type of energy infrastructure that they're dealing with. For example, in California, you have an energy infrastructure that's dominated by natural gas, except for the electricity that's imported into the state from coal plants. So the interest for California in looking at Boundary Dam, for example, might not be as high as it would be for a natural gas project demonstration somewhere. On the other hand, I think any project that shows investors that this can be done and that can generate the type of cost and business case analyses that we really need to have available for capitalists to look at. If that's the audience, then there's those projects that have the longest track records and are willing to make that data, at least in a generic form, available, are the ones that you want to share. So.
The U.S. EPA recently launched a new regulation to restrict CO2 emissions from new and existing power plants, which could negatively impact CCS, especially on coal. Do you have any comment on that?
I think I can't really speak for the Institute on this one, so I'll take my Institute hat off and give you a personal view. I think the EPA rules were an important step in some ways for the president to get his climate policy kind of up and running and actionable. It made sense. From the point of view of working with the power industry to figure out the right solution, it was a very unfortunate approach. And the jury is still out, certainly, on how this will all end up and whether it can eventually be a benefit to CCS and to coal getting its CO2 emissions down in the future and actually really becoming clean coal in the true sense of the word, which I believe is possible. So I hope that the EPA and other regulators at the state level will really reach out to industry and come up with the right solutions. And certainly anything the Institute can do to further that dialogue would be a good place for the Institute to take some actions in the next couple of years. So.
We have a question about investments in CCS. What do you see that's needed to make the investment community more comfortable with making large capital investments in CCS?
Well, the short answer to that is policy and regulatory certainty. Again, I'll go back to California just because they have cap and trade in place. And they have protocols in place for many technologies to be counted toward meeting those caps. But they don't have those protocols for CCS. They're in development right now, but it's been very slow. It's been very frustrating for project developers trying to get financing for CCS projects in the state because they honestly don't know how these things are going to be counted. And particularly when EOR is involved, because how you account for CO2, whether you just count it when it's put in the pipeline and sent to an EOR site, or whether there's going to be very expensive MMV or Class 2 to Class 6 conversions required. With that kind of uncertainty, it's almost impossible for people to make an investment with any degree of confidence. So we certainly need that. We also need data. So in projects that are going forward, just learning how much operations really are costing, learning how you could do things better to get those costs down. The people that are actually operating projects have that data, and if there's any way for them to share it such that investors can get some idea of what the operational costs will be once the capital investment is made, I think that would also be very helpful.
In your opinion, what needs to be done to increase the rate of progress on CCS in the Americas?
Again, I think policy certainty is a big factor. If we can get CCS counted as a renewable, as a carbon reduction technology along with renewables and other such technologies, that would be a huge step to improving the investment outlook and the progress. More government investment. Actually, going back to that bar chart that shows how much investment has been put into clean energy technologies versus CCS by itself, there's also a huge disparity over time in the investment made by government in renewables versus CCS. Even though there has been a sizable investment in CCS in recent years, over time, clearly the government investment in renewables has been much, much larger. Everything from tech development to subsidies for projects, and we still have a lot of subsidies going on for power produced by renewables that's not available to a power plant that puts CCS capture facilities onto its stacks. So that kind of parity is very, very important to move projects forward, and additional government investment.
Okay, this concludes our question and answer session. But if you have questions, please submit them to the Institute through the webinar inbox at webinar@globalccsinstitute.com. This webinar has been recorded and will be made available on our website along with a copy of the presentation in the next few days. As you are leaving the webinar session today, it would be very much appreciated if you would take the time to complete the brief 3-question survey, and this will help us improve our webinar programs. We hope you found this webinar informative. Thank you again for your attendance. Bye.